Greetings. Welcome to Writers on Writing. I'm Donna Hill, Executive Director for the Center for Black Literature. Writers on Writing is sponsored and supported by Medgar Evers College from the City University of New York and airs on the third Sunday on WNYE 95.1. So I am very excited today to welcome author, educator, and filmmaker Natalie Braszile. I had the pleasure of meeting Natalie at the most amazing writers retreat on Chesapeake Bay. We'll have to definitely talk about that at some point.
Definitely.
So I'm happy to be able to reconnect and catch up. So let me introduce our guest. Natalie Braszile is the author of the novel Queen Sugar, which was adapted for 7 television seasons by writer-director Ava DuVernay and co-produced by Oprah Winfrey. Queen Sugar was named one of San Francisco Chronicle's best books of 2014. Doesn't seem like it could have been that long ago, I swear.
I know.
Was long listed for the Crooks Corner Southern Book Prize and nominated for an NAACP Image Award. In her nonfiction book, We Are Each Other's Harvest, celebrating African-American farmers, land, and legacy, Natalie brings together essays, poems, conversations, portraits, and first-person narratives to tell the story of Black people's connection to the land from emancipation to the present. That's a lot of story. Yeah. So We Are Each Other's Harvest is an Amazon editor's pick and was a Wall Street Journal's Book of the Year 2021. Natalie's nonfiction essays have appeared in National Geographic, The Bitter Southerner, the Oprah Magazine, and numerous anthologies. She has taught fiction at St. Mary's College and Sierra Nevada University. A native Californian, she's on that other side of the coast. Natalie's Southern roots stem from Louisiana, South Carolina, and Alabama. Her maternal great-great-grandfather, Mac Hall, was instrumental in so much of who she became. He was a farmer, merchant, and beekeeper. Natalie's passion for the stories of Black farmers and land stewards come from a desire to shift the narrative around agriculture, farming, and labor. She has an MA in Afro-American Studies from UCLA and an MFA from Warren Wilson College's MFA program for writers. And she's had several residencies across the country, and she currently lives in San Francisco. Her new novel, Good People, will be published in fall of 2026. So maybe we can tour together because my book comes out then too.
I'd love that. That'd be great.
That'd be great, right?
That'd be fun, Donna. That'd be fun.
So welcome, Natalie, and thank you so much for taking time out to do this. I know we're on like 2 different time zones, so this is your mid-afternoon. So thank you for being here. So land, legacy, and justice. So each of those is a thread that is woven throughout your work, beginning with your novel, Queen Sugar. So talk a little bit about how and why the story came to you and why you believed it needed to be told, and also how land, legacy, and justice were so important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, this whole journey for me really started in a very unconscious way, to be honest. Mm-hmm. I am the daughter of people who were part of the Great Migration. My mom's family migrated from Alabama and South Carolina up to Detroit.
Okay.
And then my mother came from Detroit to California. And my dad is from Louisiana. And he came to California. And, I think when I think back, Donna, this idea of progress being tied to the land has always been part of my history, part of my family story. Mm-hmm. My mom used to tell the story of how when she was a girl, her parents, in addition to running the numbers, just being honest, they bought up lots in their township, in Royal Oak Township.
Okay.
And they held on to those lots as a form of, they were early real estate investors, right? Mm-hmm. Going back even farther, like you said in the introduction, On my maternal side, my great-great-grandfather owned 640 acres of land after the Civil War.
Wow.
And yeah, and was a farmer and a beekeeper. I did not know that growing up, but somehow this idea of land and land ownership and land stewardship was just kind of the air that I was breathing. And when I got old enough as a young adult, I really started to reflect on how that idea had helped my family throughout the generations, right? And kind of always grew up with this idea that if you, my parents used to say, God's not making any more land, right?
Mhm.
And so there was this idea that there was something about agency and empowerment that was tied to the land. And if you kind of expand on that idea, you think that, land is part of our identity as Americans, right? For better and for worse, right?
Right.
Land ownership. And if you go back a little, if you go back to the beginning of this country, the founding of this country, you know that the people who had the rights in this country, right? The people who could vote, the people who could own, they were landowners. So
Right.
this idea of land and agency and empowerment and sovereignty is just it's part of our national identity, and it became part of my family story.
Hmm.
So now fast forward to when I was writing Queen Sugar. Originally, the idea for that book, it was set in a fictitious version of the town where my dad grew up, right?
Yeah.
Louisiana, near the Texas border. In his little town, they grew crawfish and rice, which were not particularly poetic or interesting crops, right? But I had a friend out here in San Francisco, a white woman, whose family was also from Louisiana, but they were from New Iberia, which is smack dab in the middle of the cane growing region.
Hmm.
And when she and I met, I'll make this quick, she invited me down to her little town for her 40th birthday party, right? The town was New Iberia. It is in the heart of sugarcane country. And so when I went down there, it was at the same time that I was working on Queen Sugar, looking for a crop for my character to inherit. And all of a sudden, I find myself in the middle of this sugarcane field. And as I stood there, first of all, her family owned 2,000 acres of sugarcane land. Okay, that's first. Second, when I stood there in the middle of that sugarcane field that she drove me out to,
Hmm.
I started to think about, holy smokes, sugarcane is one of the primary crops that built this country, right? You had sugar cane, you had tobacco, and you had cotton,
Got it.
right? Those were the crops. So here I am in the middle of this field looking around at all of these acres, thinking about the little bit of history that I knew of sugar at the time, which was it came from the Caribbean, you know, people died for this, people fought over this. And I could see how by picking up my little book at the time that was set in crawfish and rice country and setting it down in sugarcane country, I could then tell a bigger story, right, about what land meant, particularly to Black people. Because as I started going back to New Iberia to do research about sugarcane and how it's grown and how it's processed and who owned it and everything, the one thing that I noticed was that there were very few Black sugarcane farmers.
Mm.
All the sugarcane farmers were white who I was meeting.
Hmm.
But if you think about Louisiana, you think that can't possibly be true, right? That Black people have never owned any sugarcane land, never, ever, ever. And so that became one of the questions for the book, which was what happened? What happened to the Black families who, even if it was a modest little sugarcane farm. What
Hmm.
happened to those people? Where did they go? And that led me on this journey of discovery, finding out what happened to Black farmers, right? From emancipation to the present. What were the systematic and structural forces that were driving these Black people off of land, right? In this case, sugarcane land. And so all of a sudden with Queen Sugar, I found that yes, I was telling this family story, but it came to represent a story of a lot of Black people who have land in their families or who had land in their families.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the seed of inspiration for Queen Sugar. And it was just a remarkable journey, as I began to really think about these issues. And then I know we'll get to it, but when I wrote We Are Each Other's Harvest, which is nonfiction, I wanted to explore those same themes, those same ideas, but with real people this time.
Mm-hmm.
Because when Queen Sugar, the book was published, and then when the show came out, I had people coming up to me saying, I love this show because I have land in my family, or I used to have land in my family, but we lost it, or we were driven off of it, or speculators came in and drove up the price and we couldn't afford it. And so I knew that Queen Sugar as a piece of fiction that was anchored in history and in truth was speaking to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to be able to say to them in We Are Each Other's Harvest, hold up now, this isn't just a made up story, right? This is actually anchored in the truth. And there are fewer, but there are still Black farmers in Louisiana, North Carolina, Arkansas, all across the South and up in the Northeast and in the Northwest and in the Midwest who are still holding on, who are still farming because they understand the value of land ownership, land stewardship, intergenerational wealth, the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of waded into this subject. And here I am 10 years, 10 years later,
It's
you
unbelievable.
know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because, you talk about land, and we understand the importance of ownership and how, since we got here,
Yeah,
we've been kept away from it as much as possible. So,
absolutely.
we think about, farmers, of course, but then when I, of course, come from, an urban setting, and we have that same issue. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Black families who bought their homes, that are being priced out, that their deeds are being stolen, that they, all kinds of, taxes. Oh, by the way, you didn't pay your water bill from, 10 years ago, so we're going to take your house.
Yeah.
And so you can't pass those things down. And then, we grew up, at least I grew up in a, the generation where, our parents or our grandparents, owned their homes. I grew up in a, a community where, all of the brownstones in our community were owned by, families. But what began to happen was that, the new generation coming up was like, I don't want to stay here, with this house. I want to go someplace and leave.
Yes.
You know, and
Yes.
then you have, the older adults who are struggling to hold on to this legacy, to have something to pass down. So, when we think about, soil, we can think about, the earth, but we also think about, the concrete as well.
100%. Yes.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
and how important it is to have something to pass along,
Mhm.
because we don't have, the dollars and cents, a
Exactly.
lot of times that our other folks have to be able to
Yeah.
pass down, a financial legacy. So if we do have, land and property,
Yes.
it's so important for the next generation. Um, so, your interest and your research and your passion for land ownership and the importance of being part of the soil is like, really part of your DNA, going back to your great grandfather. And so this is something that you explored even more deeply, which you intimated, a moment ago. We are each other's harvest. So that, of course, is the real life stories,
Hmm. Yes.
okay, that were spurned by brought up by having done Queen Sugar, right?
Yes.
So tell us about the book
Okay.
and your process. Um, weren't you doing a film on it as well?
Yes, yes. We're making a documentary film about
Oh,
one of the people, one of the families featured in the book.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
okay. I know I
yeah,
must
yeah,
have gone crazy. All right,
yeah.
so tell us about We Are Each Other's Harvest and
Okay.
and where the title came from.
Okay. So I have a little show and tell. So hold on.
Okay.
So this is the book. So this is, and I'm sharing this for a particular reason.
Okay.
So this is the book, We Are Each Other's Harvest. First of all, the title comes from uh, a Gwendolyn Brooks poem called Paul Robeson. And when I was, okay, and the book is an anthology, right? Because I knew I wanted to explore these issues of everything we've talked about, the history of Black people on the soil, on the earth, from emancipation to the present. But I'm not a historian. And I knew that I could not tell that story as a traditional history book. I would have to do it in a way that, as more of a creative, person, would be compelling.
Mhm.
So I created an anthology because I wanted the book to be dynamic and I wanted it to be a book that you could kind of sample all the things that where I draw inspiration from: poetry, photography, essays, um, interviews, conversations. So the book is really this kaleidoscope of all of these different narrative elements to tell this story in a way that I felt would be more engaging than if I were just going to sit down and no shade to historians, but I had to do it my way, right?
Right.
And that's what the book is. And so the title came from a Gwendolyn Brooks poem that says, the stanza says, "We are each other's harvest. We are each other's business. We are each other's magnitude and bond."
Mhm.
And when I was trying to come up with the title, I kind of printed out all of the chapters and all the little sayings and the statistics and everything. And I was just racking my brain trying to figure out what could I call this book that would capture this sense of history, but also community, and
Mhm.
this idea that we all are in this together and
Mhm.
we have to take care of each other and we have to move forward together, right? That's the only way we're going to succeed. And I had all the chapters spread out on this folding table. And I happened to look down and I had printed out that stanza from the Gwendolyn Brooks poem.
Mhm.
I'd seen that thing 1,000 times, Donna. But on that day, I saw it differently and I was like, holy smokes, that's it. That's the title
Mhm.
because it captured everything that I wanted to say. And I'll hold this up again. So these two young women on the cover, if you know anything about the modern farming movement among Black and Brown people, you know that these two women, Naima and Leah Pennyman of Soulfire Farm,
Mhm. They the truth.
I get chills even thinking about them now. They are so dynamic. And I wanted them to be on the cover of the book because I wanted to signal this is not just something that happened in the past,
Mhm.
right? I wanted young Black people, particularly young Black women, on the cover to signal, no, this is something that is happening now, and this is something that is the future, right? Because there are young Black people, they call themselves the returning generation, and they are folks younger than you and I
Mhm.
who are returning to the land, either in urban settings as urban farmers, or like Naima and Leah, who are going out to these rural areas, reclaiming their legacy,
Mhm.
right? Bringing all of their creativity and education and ingenuity to the next generation of farmers and land stewards. And because part of what I know is a challenge for Black and Brown people, particularly Black people, is we have, for understandable reasons, we have a very complicated idea of what our engagement with land should be, particularly farming, right? A lot of people think of it as slave work. Oh, I'm not going to get out there and get my hands dirty. I'm going to go and, go to the city and get an education and get an office job. Okay, fine. I understand that, right?
Hmm.
But part of what I'm trying to say in this book is hold up now, before you just dismiss the people who are doing this work, think about land and land stewardship as all the things we've been talking about: a source of wealth, a source of food sovereignty, food justice, agency, freedom, right? You know where your food comes from. During the pandemic, we all knew what it was like to go into that Trader Joe's or that corner store and the shelves were bare, right? So, this is a way of saying to people, I understand that we have a complicated history, but it is complicated for a reason. And we cannot forget what all these other folks know, which is land is a source of independence and wealth that you can pass on.
Hmm. Absolutely.
That was a
Absolutely.
very long-winded answer, Donna. I'm sorry.
That was wonderful. I was just like totally enthralled. And it's so true. And it's wonderful that you have these young women on the cover because, the more, I troll through, different sites and, Instagram and TikTok, whatever. And there are so many instances that come up about Black farmers
Yeah,
and
yeah,
community gardens and
yeah.
all over the country, these Black farmers are, producing their own stuff, or they're, going off the grid and, building on land and all of these different types of things. And so, hopefully, the tides are going to turn in a different direction, for us going forward. And, just to continue with that idea, like during the National Black Writers Conference that the Center for Black Literature hosts at Medgar Evers College, the panel that you're on is called Climate Change: Restoration of the Planet. Voices from African diasporic writers. Talk about how your work
Mhm.
aligns with the topic, and how did you, like I said earlier, I really focused on the two terms, food justice and food sovereignty.
Mhm,
What do
mhm.
those things mean to you? Before I ask you to read an excerpt from your upcoming book.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll try to be quick.
Okay.
So, food justice, food sovereignty, and let's add another term, environmental racism,
Yes.
right? All of those things are connected. And if you look at the history of Black and Brown people in our communities, we typically are on in the shittiest neighborhoods,
Hmm.
right? Down, my Uncle Madison in Port Arthur, Texas, lived in the shadow and downwind of an Exxon refinery. He had 5 daughters. 4 of them died of cancer,
Hmm.
right? Exxon, because Exxon didn't care about the Black community, right? He was in Cancer Alley. So that's one thing when you think about the role that Black people and Brown people have played and how we have to, and I know we do, look at our communities and understand we are often on sitting on top of the toxic waste sites, right? The Superfund sites. This is part of what we have to deal with and the challenge that we have to overcome. Okay, now you have food sovereignty, food justice. Many of our communities are in food deserts, right?
Okay.
Leah Penniman has this term, she calls it food apartheid. Why? Because her argument is, and I agree, that this is not an accident that there are no whole foods in our communities, right? We
Hmm.
don't have the same access to fresh fruit and vegetables that other communities have. And of course, there are all kinds of health outcomes that come with that, right? And so when I think about all of these ideas, it's not just, yes, it is about generational wealth, being able to pass something on, but it is also about how are we thinking about our environment, the food that we grow. How not 2 generations ago, our grandmothers they had a garden, right?
Right.
They had a garden in their front yard, whether they were in Brooklyn, Detroit, little town in Louisiana. Black people grew their own food by necessity, but it was healthy. You knew where it came from. It wasn't coated in pesticides, right? And so there is a way that I'm trying to talk about these issues because so many of us have been alienated and we've become disengaged from where our food comes from. We think it comes out of a can, right?
Yeah, of course. Yes, or a box.
Or a box. Or you ask a lot of little black and brown kids, where does a carrot grow? And they'll say, well, in the supermarket, right? And so there, and again, I'm not the only person working on these issues. There are people, boots on the ground people who are working to re-educate our communities because this is what's going to carry us forward in a healthy way, right? It's about education.
Yeah,
So,
for sure, for
you
sure.
know, yeah.
So I'm thinking that your previous work, all of your research led you to your upcoming book, which is entitled Good People. So
Right.
um I would like you to read a short excerpt
Yes, I
of
have a
Good
very short
People.
one. Okay.
And let us know when we can get our hands on it.
Okay.
And I'm ready to listen.
Okay. Okay. So I'll preface this by saying Good People is I don't have an official pub date yet, but they're telling me
Fall.
October, November 2026. So
Okay.
fingers crossed.
Okay.
This book has nothing to do with farming
Okay.
or agriculture, but it does have to do with the idea of intergenerational wealth, race, class, privilege, that whole thing, right? Which is also part of what I'm always interested in. And I'll just read the prologue and I'll try to be fast.
Okay.
Okay. And the book tells a story of two women, Babs Holloway and Nora Lockman.
Mhm.
Um, they are good friends. They've raised their kids in San Francisco with their families, and something happens that makes them question the assumptions that they have made about each other and about the world that they live in. And Babs is the narrator of the book. The Black woman is the narrator. So,
Okay.
okay. My childhood best friend was a white girl named Jody. In my memory, she simply materialized beside me one Sunday morning after church, hovering just beyond my elbow like a pale shadow, strands of her blonde hair caught in the corner of her mouth. For 4 years, starting in 6th grade, when we weren't at each other's side at school, we were on the phone. I spoke of Jody so often that her presence was in my house was all but material. Her easy laugh and nervy ways made me feel braver, bolder, freer than my always correct self, hemmed in by my old school parents with their strict sense of propriety. The eldest of the two daughters, I grew up keenly aware that there was a right way and a wrong way to behave, to think, and that my childhood didn't just belong to me. I had to represent. Jody was the opposite. She was free to be whoever she wanted to be, act impulsively, and talk back. I worshiped her, and I loved her with my whole heart. But everything changed forever at the beginning of 10th grade. Jody walked up to my locker, and I watched her take in what I was already staring at in shock. The agonizing newspaper clipping that someone had taped there in the early hours before school began. Black family fights back after home vandalized. I felt Jody's gaze on me, but we couldn't meet each other's eyes. Not that morning, and not at lunch when I watched her in the clutch of Gretchen, the new girl in our class. Gretchen looked just like Jody, sharp cheekbones, long honeyed hair. And when Jody finally did turn to look at me, I understood that she had made a choice that would give her an easier ride through life than my friendship ever could. After that fierce bond with Jody shattered, I came to know, through college and early years of adulthood, plenty of white girls and considered many to be friends. But after Jody, I never let my guard down, never let them in, never let myself love them the way I had loved Jody, though I'm sure many of them had loved me. Not until I married and became a mother. Not until I met Nora. Nora was irresistible, hip, warm, progressive, no ego in the way. She was the coolest white woman I'd ever met. Over 12 years, we practically raised our kids together, dishing about our marriages, telling each other everything. I loved her free spirit, her easy, generous ways, which encouraged me to think I might loosen up, come out of the tight shell I'd always lived in. But one day, everything changed between us. Was I right to feel betrayed by Nora's behavior as a mother and also as my closest friend? Or should I have expected everything that happened next?
Uh-oh. Whoa, 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 what happens next? You have to get the book to find out.
Got to get the book to find out.
Wow. So that is truly a departure,
Truly.
for
Yeah.
you and, what you're doing. So I'm
Yeah.
totally, totally looking forward to it. And I hope
Mhm.
it does come out around that time. So,
Yeah.
maybe we can kind of hang out and,
Yeah. I'd love that.
tour and do stuff. Is it still with Amistad?
No, this Amistad was for the nonfiction book. I'm
Nonfiction.
back with Penguin Random House. The
Okay.
same editor who published Queen Sugar
Sure.
is doing this book.
Okay. And how can folks who are listening and who will be viewing this on YouTube, how can they find you?
Well,
Or
I do have a website, although I need to update it. NatalieBaszile.com. I'm
Mhm.
there. I'm really only on Instagram,
Okay.
not on Twitter, Facebook. God knows I'm not on TikTok. Just Instagram at Natalie Baszile. So those are the two ways.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so very much for joining us. This was great. Time goes by so fast.
It flew. Yeah,
It just went by so fast, right?
it flew. It flew.
So we'll definitely have to catch up, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again. So thank you all for joining us. Again, I'm Donna Hill, and you've been listening to Writers on Writing, a program of the Center for Black Literature supported by Medgar Evers College, the City University of New York. And until next time, keep reading.